What's up, guys? Hope you guys are doing well. I'm going to be playing with the Mac 11 today, the little Mac Daddy itself. I'm really not going to talk a whole lot about the gameplay. Hopefully this is an exciting one. We eventually get a lot of people to rage quit out of this, but yeah, I was going to take this opportunity to tell you guys a story that I think would be fairly entertaining. But so to kind of frame this story, we need to go back to when about 4 years ago when I was a sophomore in college. So this was actually at the summer after my first year of college, so the summer after my freshman year. And you know, usually when you come back for school, you get that summer job, and I did have a summer job. I worked at a retail store part-time, so you know I wasn't really worried about money. But usually what I did for college is I would work in the summers and save up enough money that I wouldn't have to work so much when I went to school. Now I did have some jobs at school, but I mean for the most part it allowed me to focus on schoolwork and whatnot. So me and my buddy were trying to get this idea of how you can make extra money because these jobs weren't really paying a lot. So one of his, this guy that went to his church was telling us about how, the scrap market was really up. And by scrap, I mean like scrap metals. And scrapping metals is kind of, I don't know, it's not really the most glamorous job in the world. It's kind of actually something you would relate to like people who are trying to get drug money and stuff. But we decided that we were going to try our hand at it, and we were getting pretty good at it. At one point, I think we were. What we would do is we would ask around family and friends if they had any leftover washers, anything they wanted to get rid of. And at one point, we were putting out flyers asking people if they wanted us to come and take away their stuff. Because believe it or not, even though people know that scrap metal is worth stuff, it's a lot easier to them for someone else to take like an old washer than them to do it themselves. So we used that to our advantage, and we were actually making quite a bit of money on it. Because if you've never scrapped before, you actually make per ton. So I think we were getting roughly like 250 to a little bit more per ton. So we were making a fairly good amount of money on some loads. Like a normal load between like $30 and $40, and sometimes we would have 3 or 4 loads just from whatever we had gathered. Now the way sometimes we would get stuff is we would get it through like we would have these people. We would have the garbage schedules. And I know this sounds really ridiculous, but we would know when each neighborhood would have their garbage out. And the reason why I say garbage is a lot of times during the summer people will just put out like old lawnmowers and stuff on the curb, and you can come by and pick them up because it's just they don't want it anymore and they don't really care what you do with it. So we would do that, and we would acquire loads. But a lot of times most of our stuff came from friends and family giving us a hint on like, yeah, we need this old washer out, we need this old deep freeze removed. I remember we moved a couple deep freezes. Anyways, we were getting pretty in depth with this, and it was becoming a big deal. Like we were making a good chunk of extra money, or residual money, as you might hear in some infomercials, and we were kind of trying to take it to the next level. So my friend, who is a big guy and he's a very athletic guy, tells me about his brother's fiance's dad tells us about how he has a property, or his brother-in-law has a property that's literally like 2 houses down from my buddy's house that I've been scrapping with this whole time. And now he lives out in a rural area, so this is not like your normal neighborhood area. So it's it was this big house, and it was actually falling in on its foundation, and there was like a bunch of old cars sitting out there and just a bunch of junk. I mean, if you saw this, you'd be like, wow, why would you even go there? And they even at some point they even ended up condemning the house, I think, a few years later. But yeah, this was not the prettiest house in the world, but it had a lot of potential for having some stuff that would be valuable to scrap. And so we decided to walk down there and take a look. And while we're down there, we're looking around, and we know that we're not going to be able to carry a bunch of the scrap back, because even though it was fairly close to his house, there was no way you're going to carry scrap back. You'd have to come back down there with a truck. So we're debating. We're still kind of skeptical at this point, because we don't really know if this is legit or not. We still need confirmation that we can even go there. But being the naive fools we were, we decided that maybe we'll just go ahead and take one thing just to get it out of the way, and that ends up being our downfall. So we find this big Ford truck engine block, and I mean this thing is huge. It's not just the engine block, it's the entire engine, and this thing is just, it probably weighs 400 pounds. I mean, I don't even know how much the engine weighs. All I know is, like I said, my friend is really athletic, and we were struggling to move this thing. So finally we get it up end on its end, and we start pushing it down the hill. And like I said, this house is up on a hill, and down at the bottom is the road, so you can mostly see the house from the road. So if anyone was driving by, we probably looked ridiculous, and we probably looked extremely shady. So we're pushing this engine down the road, and we finally get it to the bottom. And when we get to the bottom, there's a guy just standing there, and he's obviously questioning us. And it turns out he's the guy who lives across the street, and that he had called the neighbors while we were doing it. And we tried to explain to him that we were, we had permission from this guy's brother saying, hey, this is his place, and blah blah blah, and that if it was a misunderstanding, we totally understand, and we're free, we'll take off and we won't take anything. And the guy's like, well, yeah, he may have owned it at some point, but this guy bought it. And when he meant this guy, he actually meant the guy that lived even further down the street, about 4 houses down. I guess a guy had bought out this guy's portion of the property, and so it was no longer this guy's property. So here we are at the bottom of a hill with a 500-pound engine, standing there looking as guilty as can be. And so we tell this guy it was a misunderstanding. At this point, my friend's mom is even standing there because she heard the commotion and walked down. And we're kind of nervous. We're like, listen, we didn't want any trouble. We had no idea this was the case. And so we think nothing of it. We go back home. And he had actually phoned the neighbor while we were doing it, but he wasn't home. And I guess he called him back at some point. And so you kind of fast forward to later in the night, we had gone to a movie. And so we're at this movie, which was actually Pirates of the Caribbean 3. I'll never forget that because I still haven't seen all of that movie because I'm just scarred by this event. We're getting calls from our parents, getting calls, out the butt, and apparently it was this guy got his buddies, like 4 other buddies, on 4-wheelers and drove them down to my friend's house. And no one was home but my friend's brother, and he was extremely, this was like a very threatening gesture to show up on 4-wheelers demanding to see us. And we were kind of caught off guard by that, and they said that if we didn't talk to him by, later that night, that he was going to call the cops. And the parents were like, listen, and you guys are overreacting, you don't need to do that. So, of course, that my friend's dad talks to him, and, he thinks it's all cool, but then all of a sudden, I guess he phoned the cop. This guy had called the cops. And so he calls the cops, and the cops want us to leave this movie and come down and talk to him. So we're basically forced, to leave the movie. And we get back home, and the cops are waiting there for us. And the first thing the cop says to us is that if we lie to him, we're going to go to jail. Now, I've never been a fan of cops, and this is one of the reasons why. We were being accused of something at this point. It's not like there was any proof that we stole anything. Obviously, if anything, we were trespassing. But for him to say that we're going to 2 kids that we're going to go to jail if we lie to him is just one of the reasons why I don't like cops. This guy was extremely rude. He was not a nice guy at all. And in the end, we do eventually get out of this. We have to explain to the guy that, it was a misunderstanding, we didn't take anything. But apparently the guy wasn't worried about the engine or us even being on the property. He was accusing us of stealing a riding lawnmower. And luckily we were able to prove to this cop that there's no way that during the time that we were there that 2 kids on foot would be able to walk a riding lawnmower, a fourth of a mile down the road. So luckily we're able to get out of it unscathed, but I don't know, I just thought I'd share that with you guys. I've always thought that's a funny story. Nothing like pushing a 300-pound engine down the road and getting caught by the neighbor.